Over 300 climbers have lost their lives on Mount Everest, with nearly 200 bodies still scattered across its icy slopes. Known as the death zone, the mountain's highest reaches offer little mercy. Oxygen is scarce, temperatures plunge, and minor missteps often turn fatal. Falls from sheer ridges, avalanches, and exhaustion are just some of the dangers that claim lives every year. Shockingly, the majority of deaths occur during descents, as climbers push their exhausted bodies beyond their limits. This video dives into the chilling stories of climbers who fell to their deaths on Everest. What went wrong in those final moments, and why is the mountain still a magnet for such deadly ambition? On May 21, 2024, Daniel Patterson, a 40-year-old British climber, and his guide, Stephan Sherpa, set out for what should have been the triumphant end to a carefully planned expedition. They had reached the summit of Mount Everest that morning, standing at 8,849 meters above sea level. For Patterson, it marked the culmination of a lifelong dream and a year of grueling preparation. For Tenji, it was another guided climb, showcasing his unmatched endurance and skill. But the descent, where most accidents on Everest occur, would become their undoing. The route down was crowded. Climbers moved in both directions, navigating the narrow ridge where one misstep could mean a fatal fall. Traffic jams had become an alarming reality on Everest, especially during the brief windows of good weather. The ridge was lined with climbers clipped to the fixed safety ropes, inching their way through the dangerous terrain. This bottleneck of people, gear, and ambition added layers of risk to an already deadly journey. The conditions didn't help. Unusually warm weather had softened the snow, creating unstable ground beneath their feet. Cornices, overhanging formations of snow and ice, lined the path, appearing deceptively sturdy, but prone to collapse under the slightest pressure. Patterson and Tenji knew the dangers. They had successfully navigated the Hillary Step, a steep and notorious obstacle, but their progress slowed as they reached the ridge packed with climbers. To descend faster, they decided to bypass the crowd. This meant unclipping from the safety ropes, moving around other climbers, and reattaching themselves, a risky maneuver that required precision and luck. It was a choice many climbers faced in such conditions, where delays could lead to oxygen depletion or worsening weather. But on Everest, risks multiply. At around 10 a.m., disaster struck. As Patterson and Tenji moved to pass a slower group, the cornice beneath them collapsed. A massive section of snow and ice broke away with a deafening sound. The ground beneath them simply vanished. The fixed ropes saved some climbers, jerking them to a halt. But Patterson and Tenji, having unclipped to pass, had no such lifeline. They fell with the collapsing snow, tumbling down the Kangshung face, a sheer, vertical drop into the depths of Tibet. The scene was chaotic. Climbers on the ridge froze, staring at the empty space where the cornice had been. Some looked down, hoping against hope for signs of the fallen men, but the slope's steepness made it impossible to see anything below. The death zone, as this area above 8,000 meters is called, is unforgiving. Oxygen is scarce, and rescue efforts are nearly impossible. The harsh truth set in quickly. There would be no coming back for Patterson and Tenji. News of the tragedy spread rapidly through radio communications to the lower camps. At base camp, climbers and guides learned that the collapse had claimed 2 lives. The loss of Tenji, a respected and skilled Sherpa, sent shockwaves through the mountaineering community. Patterson, too, was mourned. He had been climbing to raise funds for a family affected by cancer, making his journey deeply personal and selfless. Their deaths felt both tragic and senseless. As the hours passed, the ridge's remaining climbers faced their own crisis. The cornice collapse had created a gap in the route, leaving them stranded. Oxygen supplies were limited, and the risk of staying put was growing by the minute. A guide, Vinayak Jaya Mala, took the lead. Attaching himself to the remaining rope, he carefully created a path across the unstable snow. One by one, the climbers followed, their focus razor sharp. Any misstep could lead to another catastrophe. Efforts to recover the bodies began the next day, but the chances were slim from the start. The Kangshung Face is one of Everest's most perilous areas, a steep and vast expanse of ice and rock. Helicopter rescues were impossible due to the location, which fell on the Tibetan side of the mountain. Despite searches from the ridge and aerial scans, neither Patterson nor Tenji was found. The harsh reality of Everest claimed them as it has so many others. Their deaths reignited debates about Everest's overcrowding and commercialization. The mountain had become increasingly congested, with permits handed out in record numbers. In 2023, a year before Patterson's climb, overcrowding contributed to the deadliest climbing season in Everest's history. Critics argued that these conditions turned Everest from an elite challenge into a perilous traffic jam. For Patterson and Tenji, the dream of Everest ended in tragedy. Their loss became another chapter in the mountain's haunting history. On May 16, 2006, Tomas Olson stood on the summit of Everest. A Swedish adventurer and extreme skier, Tomas had spent years preparing for this moment. He had climbed peaks across the globe, driven thousands of kilometers to reach Everest's base, and trained relentlessly in Chamonix. This climb was not just about reaching the summit. Tomas had a larger goal. He wanted to ski down Everest's north face, an achievement few had even attempted. Tomas and his Norwegian partner, Tormod Granheim, set out on an ambitious expedition that spring. They planned to scale the mountain via the Mallory route and ski down the Great Couloir, also known as the Norton Couloir. This route is one of the most dangerous on Everest, steep, exposed, and unforgiving. The climb began at Advanced Base Camp, and over 2 grueling days, they pushed themselves to the summit. Reaching the top at noon on May 16th, they had already endured a 14-hour climb through a snowstorm. Exhausted but determined, Tomas hoped his strength would hold out for the dangerous ski descent. After a short rest, they began their descent. The first section took them to a narrow gully above the couloir. Here, disaster struck. Tomas's left ski broke just behind the binding. On Everest, a broken ski can be a death sentence. Tomas and Tormod tried to fix it with tape and climbing gear, but the repair was weak. They pressed on, knowing time was against them. They had no choice but to abseil as they reached a rocky cliff about 45 meters high. Finding a secure anchor was difficult. The rock was solid, and there was little ice to hold the ropes. They improvised, using 2 snow sticks and an ice axe to anchor the rope. Tomas, burdened by the broken ski, descended first. About 30 meters down, the anchor failed. Tomas fell into the Norton Couloir, plummeting 10 to 15 meters before hitting the ground. The impact likely knocked him unconscious. Unable to stop himself, he slid further down the steep face. Tormod, watching helplessly, tried to secure the anchor, but it was too late. Tomas's fall continued, 2,500 vertical meters, until he disappeared into the mid-Rongbuk Glacier below. For Tormod, the nightmare was far from over. Moments after Tomas's fall, his oxygen mask broke. Now he had to navigate the treacherous descent without supplemental oxygen. Carefully, he downclimbed the rocky cliff using a rope he no longer trusted. From there, he skied down the couloir alone, retracing Tomas's path. He found Tomas's ice axe and crampons, but saw no signs that Tomas had tried to stop his fall. The snow was undisturbed, confirming Tormod's worst fear. Tomas had lost consciousness after the initial fall. Tormod continued his descent, reaching the North Col safely, but the loss of his partner weighed heavily on him. Tomas had been more than a teammate. He was a friend and fellow adventurer, someone who shared his dream of pushing boundaries in the world's harshest environments. Back on the mountain, the search for Tomas began. A team of Sherpas, along with Tomas's colleagues Fredrik Schenholm, Olaf Sundström, and Martin Letzer, scoured the face of the couloir. On May 17th, they found Tomas's body at an altitude of 6,700 meters. It was a devastating discovery. To prevent further risks, the Sherpas moved his body 300 meters lower, out of the avalanche zone. The next day, a helicopter airlifted Tomas from the mountain. The news of Tomas's death spread quickly. It was the 8th fatality on Everest that season, a sobering statistic even for a place where death is common. Tomas had been an experienced climber, meticulous in his preparation. But on Everest, even the most skilled adventurers are at the mercy of the mountain. Tomas's dream of skiing Everest's north face was part of a larger project to ski the 7 summits, the highest peaks on each continent. If he had survived, he planned to tackle Mount Vincent in Antarctica. But Everest claimed his life, leaving his ambition unfinished. Years earlier, the mountain took another life, one deeply tied to the Sherpa community, and a man whose feats on Everest remain legendary. Babu Sherpa was born in Nepal's Khumbu region, surrounded by the towering peaks of the Himalayas. For him, the mountains were not just a backdrop, they were a way of life. Like many Sherpas, he began working as a porter in his teens, helping climbers carry gear up the slopes of Everest. By the age of 16, he officially started his career, showcasing the strength and skill that would define him as one of the greatest Sherpas in history. Over time, Babu achieved what few could. He summited Everest 10 times, an extraordinary accomplishment in itself. But his real fame came from the records he set. In 1999, he spent 21 hours on the summit without supplemental oxygen. Most climbers can only manage a few minutes at the top, but Babu stayed through the day and into the night, pushing the limits of human endurance. In another feat, he scaled the mountain in just 16 hours and 56 minutes, completing a climb that typically takes days. Babu's achievements extended beyond personal records. He cared deeply about his community in the Khumbu region, where education and healthcare were scarce. Having grown up without formal schooling, he dreamed of building schools for his children and others in the region. He raised money for these projects through his climbs, hoping to improve the lives of future generations. In 2001, during his 11th Everest expedition, Babu was once again on the mountain he loved. At Camp 2, located at 6,500 meters, he was seen walking near the edge of camp, possibly taking photos. The exact details remain unclear, but he slipped and fell into a crevasse. His absence wasn't noticed until dinner time, when others at the camp realized he hadn't returned. A search party was formed, and by midnight, they discovered the crevasse he had fallen into. The fall had been fatal. The next morning, 2 Sherpas descended into the narrow gap to retrieve his body, carefully working through blocks of ice. After 2 hours, they secured his remains and brought him to the surface. It took nearly 60 Sherpas 8 hours to transport his body down the mountain, navigating the icefall and crevasses back to base camp. Babu's death was a profound loss. At just 33 years old, he had already achieved more than most climbers do in a lifetime. His records on Everest remain unmatched, but his greatest legacy may be the work he did for his community. The schools he helped fund brought education to a region that had none, and his foundation continues to support development projects in Khumbu. Babu Sherpa's story is one of triumph and tragedy. His life was a testament to human potential, but it ended on the very mountain where he had achieved so much. Today, his name is etched into Everest's history, remembered as one of its greatest climbers and a symbol of the Sherpa spirit. Known as the Swiss Machine, Ueli Steck was a climber who had spent years redefining what could be achieved in the mountains. Born in 1976, Steck grew up in the Emmental Valley in Switzerland. As a child, he showed a natural talent for endurance sports, playing hockey, and joining his father on ski tours. By his late teens, he was scaling some of the world's most challenging peaks, including the north face of the Eiger at just 18 years old. Over the next 2 decades, he established speed records and achieved first ascents across the globe, earning a reputation as one of the best alpinists of his generation. Steck's climbing philosophy was simple but demanding. He focused on speed, efficiency, and precision. His solo ascents of peaks like the Eiger, Annapurna, and Shishapangma pushed the limits of human capability. By 2017, he was ready for his next great challenge, the Everest Lhotse Traverse. The plan was ambitious, to summit Everest via the Hornbeam Couloir, an incredibly steep and rarely climbed route, and then traverse to Lhotse, the world's 4th highest peak, all without supplemental oxygen. It was a combination no one had ever achieved. Steck arrived in Nepal in April 2017, accompanied by his climbing partner, Tenji Sherpa. They trekked to Everest Base Camp and began acclimatizing for the climb. However, early setbacks complicated their plans. Tenji suffered frostbite during a supply carry to Camp 2, forcing him to stay behind and recover at base camp. Steck pressed on, using the time to scout the route and build his strength. He soloed parts of the West Ridge and climbed from base camp to Camp 3 and back in a single day, a feat that would take most climbers several days. Steck's preparations were intense but calculated. He knew the dangers of high-altitude climbing, especially without oxygen. Still, he felt ready. At 40 years old, he believed he was in the best shape of his life, having spent weeks trail running at elevations up to 20,000 feet. His confidence was unshakable, and his excitement for the expedition was clear. Yet, Steck was also someone who made decisions quickly, often shifting his plans in the moment. On April 29th, Steck texted Tenji from Camp 2, saying he planned to climb Nuptse the next morning. Nuptse, a 7,861-meter peak near Everest, was not part of their original plan. Steck described it as the dessert, a side objective to tackle after completing the Everest Lhotse traverse. Climbing it now, instead of later, surprised even Tenji. But for Steck, it made sense. Conditions on Nuptse looked good, and it offered a chance to acclimatize while doing something challenging. He didn't respond to Tenji's follow-up question about climbing alone. Early the next morning, April 30th, Steck set out from Camp 2. Around 4:30 a.m., he started up the glacier with a French climber, Yannick Graziani, who was attempting Everest without oxygen. The two parted ways as Graziani headed toward Camp 3, and Steck veered right toward Nuptse. Several climbers and Sherpas saw him climbing the face as dawn broke. He moved quickly, ascending with the precision that had defined his career. No one knows exactly what happened next. Steck was last seen about 300 meters below Nuptse's summit. Sometime later, he fell approximately 900 meters down the mountain's north face. Witnesses from other expeditions saw the fall, but couldn't say what caused it. His body was found in the western Qom between Camps 1 and 2. The news of Steck's death spread rapidly, shocking the climbing community. How could someone as skilled and experienced as Steck fall? Some speculated that he slipped on ice or snow, a common hazard even for the best climbers. Others suggested fatigue or a misstep in the thin air at high altitude. The exact cause remains a mystery. Steck's death left a deep void. He wasn't just a mountaineer, he was an innovator, someone who had inspired countless climbers with his achievements and philosophy. His feats, like soloing the south face of Annapurna or setting speed records on the Eiger, were legendary. Yet, he was also known for his humility and generosity, often mentoring younger climbers like Tenji Sherpa. In the end, Everest claimed another life that day, adding another chapter to its long and tragic history.